And the cost of payday loans is to be limited by law. The reforms will be included in the Banking Reform Bill and should come into force next year. At the moment, charges can exceed, 4,000% annually, and there have been growing calls for tougher controls on the way some lenders operate and whom they target. Joining us now is Jonathan Davis, economist and wealth manager. Good morning, Jonathan.
Hello, Paul.
So what is being planned, and do you think it'll work?
Well, at the moment, you can phone a company to borrow £100 or £500, and they'll gladly send it to you electronically. You'll get it 15 minutes later. The problem is that many of the folk don't realise that if they don't pay it back within a week or a month as planned, then there's huge charges, and often what happens is people are taking out more loans to pay the first loan, and then of course they get into a total vicious spiral downwards. So in the banking bill coming in next year, at the moment these guys ultimately could charge, as you say, thousands of percent per annum. In other words, you might borrow £100, but it might cost you 500 or 1,000 to pay it back. So instead they're saying, assuming they bring this through, that there'll be a massive limit on charges. It'll be cut right down to not a great deal more than expensive store
so we're talking kind of
cards.
26, 28%. I mean, will this mean that some people who at the moment use these companies because they can't get credit elsewhere, will they have no access to credit in future then? Will this freeze some people out?
I think it probably will. Let me say clearly, I think these loans are anathema. I'm absolutely disgusted by these loans. In the free market, and I'm definitely a free market capitalist, I think businesses more or less should be able to do what they want unless it's to the detriment of society. And I think anyone who's borrowing at these rates is probably at a stage in their life when they need to actually change what they do, change their standard of living, change their cost of living. They shouldn't get involved in this in the first place. So this is damaging society. It is right that the people should not be getting the debt. Instead, they should do something different. Now, that, of course, means that they're going to have to cut their cloth even more harshly than probably they already are. But I'll tell you what, if they're already upstuck, the last thing they need to do is take out one of these ridiculous loans.
Good advice, but of course we know that the reality of life is that people don't necessarily take stock and change their habits, do they? They panic and think they need money, even in the short term, even if there's a long-term plan to change. And won't it the fear be that they then go to loan sharks or other even riskier situations?
Well, isn't that always the way? And human nature since ancient Greece hasn't changed. Unfortunately, if you make it into a bigger picture here, whichever government it is, whether it's the Tory Lib Dem government or the Labour government, ultimately for the last 4 or 5 decades, they have pursued policies of relatively high inflation. You may say that 2 or 3% inflation is not high, but I tell you, the cost of living is a great deal more than 2 or 3%. So it has forced families to move from a couple of generations ago where it only was one income to bring up a family. It's now 2 incomes and debt, and that more or less brings up a family. Even then, sometimes, as we're saying just now, it still doesn't work. Unfortunately, the people are going to have to grow up. They're going to have to realise, and the media has got a massive role to play here. The people are going to have to realise that we're being taken to the cleaners. The cost of living is actually much higher than they tell us.
Sure.
And we're going to have to reduce our standards of living. There is no alternative. And, if people still go to loan sharks, I'm sorry, ultimately it comes down to personal responsibility.
Jonathan, we've got to leave it there. Thank you for your time this morning, though. Jonathan Davis, the economist and wealth manager. And our finance news is on the way after the news and travel.